Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Mark's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it up to see a new notification. It was a message from an unknown number. Mark frowned, confused. He didn't recognize the name. How did she know about his situation? He hesitated for a moment, but then, out of curiosity and a growing sense of desperation, he decided to reply. The message ended abruptly, leaving Mark more confused than ever. Who was this person, and why was she offering to meet him? Was this some kind of scam? But something about the message piqued his interest. He had nothing left to lose. Maybe this could be the break he so desperately needed. He spotted a woman sitting alone at a corner table. She was dressed in a sleek, expensive suit, her silver hair styled in a way that spoke of both elegance and power. It was Eleanor Brooks. She looked up as Mark approached, her piercing blue eyes meeting his with an intense gaze. Mark took a seat, his mind racing. This was the woman who had contacted him out of the blue. Eleanor Brooks, one of the wealthiest women in the region, known for her business empire and philanthropic work. What could she possibly want with him? Mark's heart skipped a beat. Was she offering him money? Mark blinked, stunned by the request. He wasn't sure if he had heard her correctly. Marry her? This was insane. Was this a joke? He didn't know what to say, but the desperation in his chest pushed him to respond. Mark sat back in his chair, his mind spinning. A part of him wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Marrying a woman he didn't know just to pay off his debts? It sounded like something straight out of a fairy tale, but with a twist. Yet, the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he had no other options. His family was struggling, and he had no real future without money. But this was his chance. Mark looked at her, uncertainty filling his chest. This wasn't the way he imagined his life turning out, but could he afford to say no? And so, the stage was set. What started as a contract for convenience would soon evolve into something neither of them expected. The rain continued to fall as Mark stood outside Brooks' bistro, his heart racing. He stared at the glass door for a moment, unsure if he should go inside. His mind was still reeling from the conversation he had just had with Eleanor Brooks. Marry her? A woman he didn't know, all for a chance at financial security? It sounded ridiculous, yet, here he was, standing in front of the door of one of the wealthiest women in the city, wondering if he had any other choice. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. A message from Eleanor. I'm waiting inside. Don't make me wait long. Mark took a deep breath and pushed the door open. As soon as he entered, the warm air inside the bistro hit him, a stark contrast to the cold and damp outside. The place was busy but not crowded, with a few couples dining quietly in the dimly lit atmosphere. The soft clinking of silverware and the hum of quiet conversation filled the air. Eleanor sat at the same table, waiting for him, her piercing blue eyes locking with his as he walked in. There was a calm about her, an air of power and control that Mark couldn't ignore. You're here, she said, her voice steady but with a slight hint of relief. Please, sit. Mark hesitated for a second before pulling out the chair and sitting down across from her. The tension between them was palpable, but Eleanor didn't seem to mind. She looked at him with a cool, calculated gaze, as if she were assessing him, weighing him, deciding whether or not he was truly worth the investment. Her presence was almost overwhelming. I know this seems crazy, Eleanor began, her voice steady, but I'm not here to waste your time. I have a proposition, and it's not going to be easy for you to accept. Mark leaned back in his chair, his hands resting on the table, his eyes narrowed. I don't even know you, he said, his voice a mixture of confusion and disbelief. And you want me to marry you? She nodded slowly, her expression not changing. Yes. But understand, this isn't about love. It's about survival in both of our parts. You need money, and I need a partner to help secure my legacy. Mark opened his mouth to respond but hesitated, the weight of her words hanging in the air. He looked down at the table, his thoughts racing. He thought about his mother's medical bills, his sister's tuition fees, and the mountain of debt his father left behind. The weight of the world seemed to rest on his shoulders, and here was this woman offering him a way out. But was it really that simple? Was he really willing to sign away his dignity for financial security? Why me? Mark asked, his voice quieter now, more curious than angry. There must be someone better suited for this deal. Eleanor smiled, but it was a knowing smile, one that made him feel as though she had seen through him in a way no one else ever had. You're young, you're desperate, and most importantly, you're clean. You have nothing to lose, but everything to gain. And I need someone who won't ask questions. Someone who won't get involved in the business side of things. Mark felt a flicker of something in his chest, anger, frustration, but also a strange sense of understanding. And what do you want from me, exactly? Eleanor leaned in slightly, her voice lowering to almost a whisper. I want you to be my husband, Mark. For legal reasons, for appearances, for my company. And I'll take care of everything else. You won't have to worry about debt, about your future, about anything. I'll handle it all. You'll live a life most people can only dream of. For a long moment, Mark said nothing. He thought about his life, his dreams of becoming a lawyer, of making something of himself, of finally being free of his father's legacy. But all of that seemed so distant now, so far out of reach. The weight of his reality was too heavy. He looked up at Eleanor, her calm, confident demeanor almost too much to bear. What's the catch? Mark asked finally, his voice low. There has to be a catch. Eleanor smiled again, but this time, it wasn't just a smile. It was a promise. No catch, Mark. Just a contract. A commitment. Marry me, and we both get what we need. You'll never have to worry about money again. Mark sat in silence, his mind spinning. It was absurd. It was crazy. But at the same time, it made perfect sense. This could be his way out. His way up. But at what cost? He looked at Eleanor once more, this time seeing her not just as a businesswoman, but as someone offering him a chance he couldn't ignore. Was it worth it? I'll do it, he said quietly, surprising even himself. I'll marry you. Eleanor's eyes softened for the briefest moment, but she quickly regained her composure. Good. I knew you would. We'll start the paperwork soon. Mark's heart was pounding in his chest as he left the bistro. The decision was made. He had agreed to the contract. But what would come next? He didn't know. But he knew one thing for sure: his life would never be the same. The next few days felt like they were moving in slow motion for Mark. After the gala, something had shifted inside him. He couldn't ignore the feelings he had started to develop, not just for Eleanor, but for the life he was now leading. There was a part of him that was starting to enjoy the luxury, the attention, the comfort, but there was also a nagging feeling deep inside him, a feeling that told him he wasn't truly happy. He wasn't sure what he wanted anymore, but he knew one thing: this was not the life he had envisioned for himself. It was the weekend when Mark got the call. He had been spending the morning in the library, trying to catch up on some of the law school readings he had neglected, when his phone buzzed. It was from Eleanor. Meet me at the office, we need to talk, the text read. The tone was businesslike, cold even. Mark's heart skipped a beat. It had been days since they had really talked about anything personal. The contract between them had been clear: was the husband in name only, a prop for her image. But he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep pretending. Part of him was beginning to question whether this arrangement was really enough for either of them. Mark arrived at her office, a sleek, modern space that matched the image Eleanor had so carefully cultivated. As he stepped inside, Eleanor was standing by the large windows, looking out at the city skyline, her back to him. She turned as he walked in, her face unreadable. Mark, she said coolly, I've been thinking a lot about this. About us. And I think it's time we have a real conversation. Her words sent a chill through Mark's spine. He had known this moment was coming. It had to. There was no way they could keep going on like this, pretending that everything was fine. What do you mean? He asked, trying to sound calm, even though his heart was pounding in his chest. Eleanor sighed and motioned for him to sit. I think you and I both know that we're living in a fantasy. This marriage, this arrangement, it was supposed to be a business deal, nothing more. But lately, I've been wondering if it's more than that for you. I've noticed the way you've been acting, the way you've been looking at me. You're starting to get attached, Mark. Mark opened his mouth to protest, but Eleanor raised a hand to stop him. No, don't deny it. I know you. I've seen it before. And I won't be part of that. This was never meant to be anything real. She paused, her eyes meeting his. I can't let this go any further. I can't let myself get hurt. Mark felt a wave of confusion and frustration wash over him. He didn't understand. Why was she doing this? Didn't she feel anything? Wasn't there even a small part of her that had started to care about him, just a little? He thought about the quiet moments they'd shared, the brief conversations when Eleanor let her guard down, the fleeting moments when he saw a hint of something softer beneath the cool exterior. But now, those moments seemed to mean nothing. Eleanor, I never asked for this, he said, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. I never asked to fall for you. But I did. I'm not just some piece in your game. I'm a person. And I'm not going to pretend anymore. Eleanor's expression softened for a split second, before she quickly masked it with her usual cool demeanor. I know, she said, her voice quieter now. I know, Mark. But this is the way it has to be. We're too different. We come from different worlds. You'll never fit into mine, and I can't fit into yours. That's the reality. And I'm not going to let myself get hurt over something that was never supposed to happen. Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. He couldn't sit there anymore. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. So, what now? He asked, his voice cold. Eleanor hesitated for a moment, then stood up too. I think we should end this now, Mark. There's no point in dragging this out. We both knew what this was when we started. There's nothing more to say. Mark couldn't believe what he was hearing. This was it. She was ending it. Just like that, all the emotions he had bottled up, all the moments of connection, all the things he thought could grow between them, all of it was gone, just like that. He turned and walked towards the door, but before he could leave, Eleanor spoke one last time. I'm sorry, Mark, she said quietly. But this is for the best. Mark stopped in his tracks. He didn't say anything. He couldn't. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion, frustration, and hurt. He didn't know what to feel anymore. Was this really the end? Had he been fooling himself this whole time? He took a deep breath and walked out, the weight of her words pressing down on him. As he stepped outside into the cool evening air, Mark looked up at the stars. He felt like he was standing on the edge of something, unsure of what came next. But one thing was clear: he had to make a choice. A choice about what kind of life he wanted to live. And whether he was going to continue down this path or walk away from it all. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Mark felt like he had the power to change his future. Mark left Eleanor's office in a daze. The cool night air hit him like a wave, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside his head. He had barely processed what had just happened. One moment, he had been standing in front of Eleanor, hoping for some sign that there was more to their arrangement, that there was more to her feelings. The next, she had shut it down, as if it had all been a game. He walked aimlessly through the city streets, the bright lights blurring as he thought about his life, about the choices he had made. Was this truly the end? Had everything he felt been nothing more than a fantasy? As Mark walked, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't want to look at it, but the persistent vibration made him pull it out. It was a message from Eleanor. I'm sorry, Mark. I didn't mean to hurt you. But I had to make this decision. Mark read the message twice, trying to make sense of it, but it only left him feeling more confused. He didn't know whether to be angry or to feel sorry for her. But deep down, he couldn't help but feel betrayed. She had given him just enough to make him believe that something real could grow between them. But now, it felt like she had taken it all away in one fell swoop. Mark didn't reply. Instead, he stuffed his phone back into his pocket and kept walking, the weight of her words pressing down on him with each step. his thoughts kept swirling around the same question: why had he allowed himself to get caught up in this? Why had he thought he could make something real out of a contract, out of a deal that was never meant to be anything more? And why did it hurt so much now that it was over? The next morning, Mark woke up to an empty house. The silence felt different now, almost deafening. He had grown used to the hum of activity, the servants, the staff, the meetings, and the constant flurry of movement that came with living in Eleanor's world. But today, it all seemed so distant. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, trying to focus, but his thoughts kept returning to the conversation he had had with her. He felt like he was stuck in limbo, caught between the life he had built with her and the life he thought he had left behind. He reached for his phone again, scrolling through the messages. There were several from his mother, asking how he was doing, whether he had figured things out with Eleanor. Mark hadn't responded to any of them. He wasn't ready to talk to anyone yet. The pressure of the last few weeks had been overwhelming, and he just needed a moment to breathe. Finally, he sent a quick reply to his mother, telling her he was fine, that everything was taken care of. But even as he typed the words, he knew they weren't true. Nothing was fine. Nothing was taken care of. He felt like he was standing at a crossroads, unsure of where to go next. He had promised himself that he wouldn't fall into a life of complacency. He had wanted to make something of himself, something real, but now it seemed like he had sacrificed everything to live someone else's dream. Later that afternoon, Mark found himself back at his old apartment, the one he had lived in before all of this. The place was small, cramped even, but it felt more like home than the mansion he had come to call his own. It was quiet here, and for the first time in weeks, Mark felt a sense of peace. He sat down at his old desk, the one he had used during law school, and started going through his books, his notes, trying to remind himself of who he had been before all of this. The dreams he had, the goals he had set for himself, it was all still there, buried under the weight of his recent choices. He spent the rest of the day going through old files, trying to regain some sense of control. The world outside the apartment felt distant, almost unreal. It was hard to imagine going back to a life of normalcy after everything that had happened. But as the evening approached and the city lights flickered on in the distance, Mark found himself wondering if he could find a way to move forward. A way to make his own path, not one dictated by someone else's rules. Mark's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Eleanor. He stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of what to do. He wasn't sure if he was ready to talk to her, but he knew he couldn't keep avoiding her. With a deep breath, he answered the call. Mark, Eleanor's voice came through the line, softer than he expected. I've been thinking a lot about what happened. I don't want this to end like this, with you feeling like you've been used. I want to fix this. Mark's heart raced as he listened. He wasn't sure if he could believe her. But part of him wanted to. Part of him wanted to believe that this wasn't just a business transaction. That there was something real here, something worth fighting for. But what would it take for them to get there? And was it too late? Eleanor, I don't know if we can fix this, Mark said, his voice shaking with emotion. But I'm willing to try. If you are. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. For the first time in a long while, Mark felt like maybe, just maybe, they were on the same page. The days that followed Mark's conversation with Eleanor felt like a delicate balance between uncertainty and hope. He had agreed to give their arrangement another chance, but he wasn't sure what that meant yet. What could they salvage from the wreckage of their business deal that had almost cost them everything? Eleanor had seemed genuinely apologetic, but Mark still had his doubts. She had said she wanted to fix things, but could they really? Could they move past the cold contract they had started with and build something real? As the days passed, Mark and Eleanor met more frequently, but their meetings were always business first. They attended more charity events, hosted dinners, and kept up appearances, but there was a quiet tension between them. Eleanor never spoke of their personal lives, and Mark didn't push. He didn't want to risk pushing her away again, but the walls she had built around herself were becoming more difficult to ignore. One evening, after a particularly grueling dinner with business partners, Eleanor invited Mark to join her for a drink at the penthouse. It had been a long day, and Mark had been dreading the thought of more public appearances. He agreed, hoping that maybe tonight they could talk. Just the two of them. When he arrived, Eleanor was standing by the bar, her back to him as she poured herself a glass of wine. She turned when she heard him enter, her eyes softening for a moment before she masked it with her usual composure. "I thought you might be late," Eleanor said with a faint smile. "You're not usually one for small talk at these events." Mark smiled back, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not sure I'm cut out for all this anymore. It feels so fake." She raised an eyebrow at him, her tone casual. "That's why we made the deal in the first place, isn't it? To make things easier. You don't have to like it. You just have to play your part." Mark nodded, but the words stung. He had played his part, but the longer he lived this life, the more he realized how little it meant to him. The luxury, the fame wasn't enough. He wanted something deeper. He wanted more than just appearances. "I know," he said, his voice low. "But I'm starting to wonder if I'm just pretending. I've been pretending to fit into your world, and I don't know if I can do it anymore." Eleanor took a sip of her wine, her expression unreadable. She studied him for a moment, as if deciding whether or not to speak. Finally, she set the glass down and walked over to him. "Mark," she began, her voice softer now. "You knew what this was when we started. You knew what I needed. But there's more to this than just us. There's more to this marriage than you and me." Mark felt a twist in his chest. "What do you mean?" "I'm not just doing this for the company, for my legacy. I'm doing this because I've spent my life alone, building everything, and I've never had anyone to share it with. You're not just a part of a business deal. You're part of something bigger, something that's supposed to matter." The words hit Mark harder than he expected. He had thought all along that he was just a means to an end. That Eleanor had never cared for him, that this was all about money and status. But now, in her voice, he heard something different. Something vulnerable. She wasn't just protecting her image. She was protecting herself. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Eleanor, I don't want to be just a part of something that doesn't feel real. I can't keep living like this if it's all fake. I care about you. More than I should. But I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything's okay if it isn't." For a moment, Eleanor didn't respond. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face, as if weighing her own emotions. Then, finally, she spoke. "I care about you too, Mark," she said quietly. "But I've built my life on control, on certainty. I've spent so many years building this empire, and I've never let anyone in. I don't know how to let you in. I don't know how to trust anyone enough to be vulnerable." Mark's heart softened as he heard her words. He knew what it was like to guard yourself, to build walls around your heart. He understood why she had kept herself distant. But now, standing in front of her, he couldn't help but wonder if this was their moment. Their moment to decide whether they would take a chance on something real. "We don't have to rush this," Mark said gently. "I don't want to force you into anything. But I don't want to keep living in a world where nothing feels genuine. I need to know that what we have, whatever it is, isn't just part of some contract. I need to know if this is real." Eleanor stood there for a long moment, her eyes filled with conflicting emotions. Then, without a word, she stepped closer to him. She reached out and placed her hand on his, a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. "Maybe we can figure this out," she said softly. "Maybe we can make it real. But it's going to take time. And it's going to take trust." Mark nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't alone in this. Maybe they could build something real together. Maybe there was a chance for them after all. The days following their conversation felt different. Mark and Eleanor were no longer just playing their parts in the contract they had signed. There was something real starting to take shape between them, but neither of them knew exactly how to move forward. They spent more time together, talking, really talking, about everything from their childhoods to their dreams and fears. For the first time, Mark saw a side of Eleanor that was raw, unguarded, and vulnerable. She wasn't just a powerful CEO who ran an empire. She was a woman who had spent most of her life alone, afraid to let anyone in. And for the first time, he began to understand her, truly understand her. But as the days passed, it became clear that not everything was as perfect as it seemed. There was still a wall between them, a barrier neither of them knew how to break down. Eleanor was still hesitant, still unsure about trusting Mark completely, and Mark could feel it. She would let him in just enough to make him feel like there was hope, but then pull away again when things started to feel too real. It came to a head one afternoon when Eleanor asked him to meet her at the office. She was busy as usual, dealing with another one of her business projects. But when Mark arrived, he could tell something was different. There was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Eleanor was pacing back and forth, clearly deep in thought, and when she saw him, her face was unreadable. "Mark, we need to talk," she said, her voice unusually sharp. She didn't ask him to sit down. Instead, she continued pacing. "I've been thinking about this, about us, and I don't know if I can do this anymore. I don't know if I can continue pretending that everything's fine." Mark felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "What do you mean?" he asked quietly, already dreading what was coming. She stopped pacing, her back to him as she stared out the window, her voice softening. "I care about you, Mark. More than I should. But I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be real with you when I've spent my whole life pretending to be something I'm not. And I'm scared of letting you in and letting myself feel something more. I've spent so long building this life, this empire, and I can't risk it all for something that could break me." Mark stepped closer to her, his heart pounding in his chest. He had known this moment was coming, the moment when the walls would come back up, when the reality of their situation would hit, but he couldn't walk away now. He had come too far, and despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, he knew that he couldn't let go of what they were starting to build together. "Eleanor," he said softly, reaching out to gently touch her arm. "I'm not asking you to change everything overnight. I'm not asking you to let go of everything you've worked for. But I can't keep living in this limbo. I can't keep pretending that what we have isn't real when it feels like it is. I need to know if you're willing to try. To take a chance on us." She turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. She looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words, as if searching for something in his eyes that would tell her everything would be okay. Finally, she took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping as if she had been holding her breath for far too long. "I don't know if I can do this, Mark," she whispered, her voice shaky. "But I'm willing to try. For you. For us." Mark's heart lifted, a wave of relief washing over him. They weren't there yet, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like they were on the same page. This wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges, misunderstandings, and moments when it felt like everything was falling apart. But at least they were willing to try. And that, for now, was enough. "That's all I need," Mark said, his voice filled with sincerity. "We'll figure it out, Eleanor. One step at a time." And in that moment, both of them knew that this was the beginning of something different, something real. The days that followed felt like a slow, steady build towards something neither Mark nor Eleanor could have predicted. They began spending more time together, not just in business settings, but in quiet moments at home, sharing meals and conversations that stretched late into the night. For the first time, Eleanor allowed herself to let go of the walls she had spent years building around herself. She opened up to Mark about her past, about the loneliness that had driven her to focus solely on her work, to guard herself from ever getting hurt again. And Mark, in return, began to share more of his own struggles, his fear of being stuck in a life he didn't choose, his need for something real. They were still navigating the delicate balance of their unconventional marriage, but there was a new sense of honesty between them. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough for now. One afternoon, as they were both sitting on the balcony of their penthouse, Mark looked over at Eleanor, who was staring out at the city below. The view was breathtaking, but it was clear that her mind was elsewhere. He set down his coffee cup and leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Eleanor, I know this hasn't been easy for either of us. I've seen the way you've been carrying everything, trying to make it all work on your own. But you don't have to do that anymore. I'm here, and I want to be a part of your life, not just the business. I'm not going anywhere." Eleanor turned to him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, there was silence between them, the kind that stretched long enough for Mark to wonder if he had said too much. But then, she smiled softly, a smile that reached her eyes, and Mark knew he had said the right thing. "I know, she said quietly, her voice filled with sincerity. And I've been thinking about that too. I've been so focused on control, on making everything perfect, that I forgot what really matters. But now I see that there's more to life than just success. There's more to us than just the contract we signed. She paused, as if weighing her next words carefully. I'm scared, Mark. But I'm willing to take a chance on us. On this. Mark's heart swelled as he heard her words. They were both taking a leap, stepping into the unknown with no guarantee of what would come next. But for the first time, he felt like they were truly on the same path. It wasn't going to be easy, but maybe, just maybe, they could make it work. I'm glad to hear that, he said, his voice full of emotion. We don't have to have everything figured out right now. We'll take it one step at a time. But whatever happens, we'll face it together. He reached out, taking her hand in his, a simple gesture that meant more than words could say. For the first time in a long time, Eleanor allowed herself to lean into him, to accept the comfort he was offering. There was still a long road ahead of them, filled with uncertainty and challenges. But there was also something real between them now, something built on trust, vulnerability, and a willingness to fight for it. As they sat together in the fading light of the afternoon, Mark and Eleanor knew that this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning. And though they didn't know what the future held, they were ready to face it together. As weeks passed, Mark and Eleanor found themselves settling into a rhythm that felt almost normal. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of doubt, but they were building something real, something neither of them had expected when their journey began. Eleanor let her guard down more, allowing herself to truly lean on Mark, not just in their marriage, but in her life. They began making plans, real plans, about the future. It wasn't about business deals or appearances anymore. It was about them, what they wanted, what they needed, and how they could grow together. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Mark looked over at Eleanor, who was absorbed in a report for one of her philanthropic projects. The room was filled with a comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when two people have found peace with each other. Mark had watched her over the past few weeks. Her transformation was nothing short of amazing. She was still the strong, driven woman he had first met, but now there was something more. A softness, a warmth that had been buried under years of walls. He was beginning to see the woman beneath the CEO, the woman who had dreams, fears, and a heart that was capable of love. You know, Mark said casually, breaking the silence, I never thought I'd end up here. I never imagined I'd be sitting in this penthouse with you, working through all this life, love, everything. I always thought I'd have to do it alone. Eleanor looked up from the report, a slight smile forming on her lips. She put the papers down and turned her attention to him, her eyes softening. I know what you mean. I never thought I'd let anyone in. I was too focused on building my empire, too afraid of what it would mean to open up to someone. But now, I can't imagine my life without you in it. Mark smiled, his heart lifting. He could feel that this was real. This wasn't just a business arrangement anymore. They had something solid, something built on trust, respect, and love. For the first time, he truly believed in the life they were creating together. You've changed me, Eleanor, he said, his voice full of emotion. You've shown me that life is more than just survival. It's about living, about sharing it with someone who cares. I don't want to go back to who I was before. Eleanor reached out, taking his hand gently. I don't want to go back either, she said softly. I've spent too long building walls around myself, but with you, I'm learning to take them down. I'm learning to trust again. Mark squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of her words. He knew they were both taking risks, and the road ahead would not always be easy. But he also knew that they were no longer just two people playing roles. They were partners, equals, and they had built something real. As the evening went on, Mark and Eleanor sat together, talking about their dreams. They didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like they could face it together. Their pasts had shaped them, but they weren't defined by them anymore. They were ready to step forward, side by side, into whatever came next. And as Mark looked at Eleanor, the woman who had once been so distant, so unreachable, he knew that their story was far from over. This was just the beginning. The beginning of a new chapter, a chapter filled with love, trust, and the promise of a future they would build together. With a smile, Mark whispered, "To us." Eleanor leaned in, her smile reflecting his, and for the first time, she felt at peace with the future they were creating. "To us," she agreed, her heart full of hope.